we are studying single-sex education in order to find out its strengths and weaknesses when it comes to the promotion of gender equality, allowing us to select future educational policies. In order to confront this study, we are first analyzing the context of the issue through the understanding of both single-sex education and the coeducational model meaning. Moreover, we will expose the differences between coeducation and mixed schooling through the explanation of what coeducation means. And, in addition, we will answer to the questions: how did coeducation emerge and how it is actually approached in comparison with single-sex schools. To continue with the issue, we will expose several benefits and weaknesses, and finally, we will analyze the research about single-sex schooling, which includes a real approach of the topic. Coeducation is theoretically defined as the education of both male and female students at the same institution. But what has been the social impact of this schooling? The creation of coeducation in Spain has contributed to the elimination of such a lot of social barriers about gender. So, if coeducation is mainly considered as a social improvement towards equality, why are there still single-sex schools? As we have defined coeducation, we should also explain what are we talking about when we say single-sex education. By definition, a single-sex school is a school which educates boys or girls exclusively. To continue with the contextualization of the issue, it is important to explain deeply what gender segregation schools imply and so what the coeducational model is. The main purpose of gender segregation at the schools is potentiating the gender opportunities for each sex so that it favorishes the academic performance. The main reason given to defend this idea is that once the gender pressure disappears, the student can approach their studies without gender stereotypes and prejudice that stop their academic interest. Before talking about the coeducational model, we first have to distinguish between the mixed schools and coeducation. Mixed schools are not coeducational schools because coeducate is not just unifying girls and boys without taking into account their differences, and just considering as equality the opportunities to access mixed education. To educate, we need first to correct every kind of inequality or discrimination for gender reasons, as well as ensure good relationships in the educative practice to achieve equality. Secondly, we need an integrated concept of the students so as to form autonomous and responsible people in the public and private eye. Therefore, we need to take into account the necessities, expectations, and interests of each of the students to avoid unequal topics. For example, feminine and masculine, rational and emotive, political and public, or domestic and private. But this is not easy, so it requires educative strategies, highly trained teachers, or editorials collaboration. Now we have defined both single-sex and coeducational models, we can ask ourselves, how did coeducation emerge and how it is actually approached in comparison with single-sex schools? Coeducation firstly emerged in Occidental countries. The rise of this school approach rapidly expanded through different countries, so that the remaining single-sex schools had to demonstrate their efficacy through several studies. Those studies were mainly focused on academic success. Along the years, the same answer has been given to the issue of why single-sex education are still in our educational systems. The answer remains to the idea that has been previously explained. It avoids distractions, improves the behavior in class, and decreases the gender pressure.
We are now going to analyze the motives for which single-sex education should be implemented, without taking into account the origin and destiny of women and men, nor their religious motivations or their social status, and of course question them. The defenders of this model, which are two authors in which we have based our research, called Penin and Hughes, state that its main principle is to help to eliminate and correct in the private and public sectors gender discrimination. Let's check if this is true. First of all, we are going to talk about the biological differences. This type of schools want to separate girls and boys because their different natures imply treating them differently. According to Leonard Sachs, president of the National Association of the Differentiated Learning by Sex in the United States, defends that the autonomic nervous system works differently in girls and boys. When a boy feels stressed in the classroom, he activates the sympathetic system, whereas girls activate the parasympathetic one. Boys seem to be enthusiastic and quick, whereas girls are more shy and need learning methods more sensitive to them.
If the brains of girls and boys are different, as well as the different methods of learning for both genders, the tendencies and capacities should also be different, but however, they end up being the same as those promoted by society. Moreover, are the brain capacities relevant to the learning process of the kids? Do they affect children to acquire the basic competencies of the curriculum? And does it take into account the great plasticity of the brain to be in constant change and development? The brain capacities differences give scientific base to the nature argument, as it explains the rationality of men and the emotional sense of women. This also explains the capacity of men for maths and deductive reasoning, and therefore girls tend to avoid technical degrees, choosing those of caring and teaching. However, people choose these degrees without being influenced by mixed education or differentiated schooling, or any institutional factor. Today, opponents of single-sex schooling advocate that separating students by sexes is inherently unequal. In order to reinforce this approach, they compare the segregation by sex carried out in the single-sex schools to the one by race which was performed during the apartheid. Although this simile can seem completely coherent, it shows some deficiencies. Firstly, we have to understand that, sadly, the apartheid was not an option, but an imposition. Contrarily, single-sex schooling is optional. Parents, teachers, and students are the ones in charge of deciding which educational model to choose. On the other hand, while apartheid was not designated to elevate black people opportunities and rights at the level of the rest, single-sex does so. The initiative behind single-sex education is to elevate both sexes to a higher level of achievement.
If differentiated education has all these advantages, why only private schools, more in-depth, religious school, offer it? Because there is another argument in favor regarding the behavior and stereotypes within the mixed schools held by Cornelius Riordan. He states that following the society's stereotypes, boys are offered to study some professional formative choices such as telecommunication, electronic installations, informatic systems administration, financial administration, and on the contrary, they offer girls professional choices such as secretary, administrative management, cooking, fashion. Differentiated learning, therefore, does not avoid sexism. Whenever a group is highlighted for any reason, gender, social status, economic status, this feature tends to be the most important for the group, and the whole group will want to have it as well. Therefore, fighting against sexism, dividing by sex, is like fighting against racism, dividing people by race or ethnic group. It is the best way to maintain social, racial, and gender prejudices and inequalities.
But don't forget that also this same author, Cornelius Riordan, defends that single-sex education is the perfect one for the lowest social classes, as there is more discipline and organization, including the maintenance of equality above anything. Girls learn in a comfortable environment, far from violence and developing their capacities to be excellent. Boys also learn better as they don't have the sexual stereotype of girls since they do not compete with them and learn in a different rhythm as girls. In fact, as Penin says, single-sex schooling is seen as a pseudoscience by many, because that promotes sexism and gender stereotypes, since none of the single-sex defenders have shown empirical evidence to support their arguments. However, There is empirical evidence that supports the opposite. Single-sex education increases the gender stereotypes and institutional sexism. Therefore, he states that students receive a more personalized attention in single-sex schools. Not only the students are segregated, but also the teachers, so that the children's education is personalized according to their maturity and learning levels. In this way, the equality of opportunities is ensured. A great advantage of this kind of school is that their students have also better academic results than in coeducational schools.
Indeed, the academic success of single-sex education is also not tested, as it does not consider the social and economic situation of children, as well as factors such as the high range of school abandonment of those who don't get to the standard marks. This is proved since there is no evidence of the results improvement in reports since the 70s in the USA, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. The same happens in Spain. The unequal performance has relation with the educative level of families rather than with gender or any other variable. The differences in academic performance can be explained by the sexual and cultural stereotypes that children have at their houses, in the case of the poorest areas, in which males are the ones who maintain the whole family. In fact, this plays a great role in the school failure of children because boys tend to reproduce their father's behavior and choose to work instead of continuing studying. In the case of girls, they look for escaping from the situations in which they are undervalued and study to be independent. Actually, there are more performance differences within groups of the same gender than between genders when we consider sociocultural and local context and the social influence.
On the other hand, opponents of single-sex schooling defend that this educational model has a detrimental impact on the social growth of each sex, and argue that coeducation is better for both sexes, as it allows them to develop interpersonal skills, so they can interact with each other. As they say, without the collegial relationships, boys and girls will not develop into men and women who understand and respect each other. But to what extent is this true? Is a school the only institution in which both sexes coexist? Are not students together with other individuals of their opposite sex outside schools, in their families, neighborhoods, or churches?
To end up with, we are going to talk about a research whose main purpose was to examine in depth the reasons and motivations for creating or maintaining single-sex schools in Spain. The research was performed with 12 principals, in which 8 men and 4 women of single-sex schools in Spain participated. Analyzing their opinions and experiences in segregated schools, we have come to the conclusion that the main reason why these schools are still working in Spain is that, according to what the principals defended, the academic result is better because of the environment in the classrooms.